Live Coding with AWS. Today we have a very special guest, Ian Scofield from the SA team. Ian, would you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Ian Scofield, and I'm a solutions architect here on the partner team at AWS. And so I work with various partners, and in part of that job, we perform well-architected reviews for our customers and our partners. And so I wanted to take some time to go through that today and kind of describe what that process is and answer some frequent questions that we get asked.
Yeah, this is important. This is for you guys to take questions and understand a bit better of how you can not only architect better your apps, but ways to get involved with AWS and how this happens with customers. So Ian's got a lot of experience with that. We are watching the questions and we are in the chat. Please feel free to jump in, right? So let's start with why AWS Well Architected and why customers should care about it at all. If this is your first time joining us, you're probably, if you've seen the other ones, you probably know a bit of Well Architected, but for those just joining, why would you say Well Architected is important?
Yeah, and that's a common question we get asked from customers and partners is, why should I do this? What's the benefit for me in going through this well-architected process? And there's a couple of benefits, and I want to hit on some of those today. The first is, you get time to actually go through your architecture with a solutions architect here at AWS. And so that's a huge benefit because a lot of customers, are really wanting to reach out to their SA to, either ask questions particular to their architecture or maybe just want to get validation that they're doing things the correct way. And so the well-architected framework is designed to give customers that opportunity to step through their architecture, say, hey, this is, one of my services, here's another service, this is how they talk to each other, this is how we're tackling security or authentication, and be able to, get the validation that they're following the best practices. And so that's one of the biggest benefits that we see. And so we typically do the review over the course of a couple of hours. And so this gives them the chance to bring developers, product managers, C-level executives on the phone to ask, pointed questions about their architecture, about, are we doing things the correct way? And additionally, kind of diving deeper into that topic, we give them the opportunity to, make sure they're lining up with these principles or the 5 pillars that we have in the well-architected framework. And a couple of those, so we have security and cost optimization, and those 2 are really, really important. All 5 are important, but we do focus primarily on those 2 because those are the ones that can really impact customers and our customers' customers. So for things like, I was working with a partner the other day, and they were using DynamoDB, and their workload is typically only from 9 to 5. And so I suggested, taking advantage of DynamoDB's auto scaling, which can automatically scale things down, overnights and weekends, saving them a lot of money. And so they were very receptive to that, and gave us some feedback that they were able to save, a pretty substantial amount of money. So there's a lot of benefits there that come from it.
Yeah, and I guess it varies from customer to customer what they're interested in and what are their current priorities. And this is something that comes up a lot. Like, customers are busy doing their thing and they can't stop to reinvent the architecture. So how does this happen, like in real life, when you have your business running? How intrusive we are? Should they reserve some time, or how does this relationship happens?
Yeah, it's a delicate balance because you want to make sure that you're focusing on security, but we completely understand here at AWS that you have to continue to add features, you have to continue to innovate, and that takes developer time and resources to do that. And so, here at AWS, we have an incredible pace of innovation, but, we also have a focus on security. And security here at AWS is job zero. And, if that ever, kind of deviates, we'll drop everything to make it so. And we want to make sure that our customers and our partners are having that same mindset. So when we go through the well-architected framework and we're asking questions like, do you use root account credentials, or are you collecting access keys? Those are the kind of questions that, no matter what features you have on your roadmap, those are things that should be dealt with and looked at very seriously in the now. And so when we go through the review, we'll identify those types of things, and kind of put them in 2 different categories. So we have critical findings and we have recommended findings. And so we'll put the items that are kind of more serious and pose a risk to either your business as a whole, whether it's not having a disaster recovery plan or just not having thought about those various components. or if you're posing some security risk based on the way your application's architected. Those are things that we'd put in that critical category because we'd want you to prioritize those to remediate those very quickly.
Yeah, this makes sense. I can imagine, for example, that the things in the security pillar are pretty important. For just if you guys, let me show the paper for the guys that are watching this for the first time. So this is the Well Architected Framework paper, and as we were talking, we divided into these 5 sections: security, reliability, performance efficiency, cost optimization, and operational excellence. And each one is composed by a set of design principles and questions to help customers get well architected. And for example, let's jump to the security part. Some things such as protecting access to the root account and making sure that resources are safe would go into this.
Very much so.
How do you call the priority?
Yeah, like the critical findings are kind of what we identify. And so, good call on bringing up the white paper. So there's a lot of good information in here. And the way this is written is that you can kind of do it yourself. So we want this to be a very self-service tool because we understand that customers and partners want those answers, want that feedback immediately. And so by providing this white paper, it gives them kind of the same tooling and methodology that we're going to go through here internally. And this serves a couple different points. So if a customer or partner wants to get started on the Well Architected review, we always steer them towards this white paper to help them get familiar with what are some of the best practices, what are the pillars. And then if you scroll to the end of this white paper, you'll actually see, and you actually see them here as well, the list of questions that we're going to ask during the review. And so this is very helpful for customers and partners to go through and kind of self-identify with these questions. They can ask themselves, how am I protecting my root account credentials? How is my build pipeline authenticating with AWS? Am I using IAM roles or am I using access keys? And so by doing that kind of pre-flight check internally, they can see, are we close? Are we not close? What are some areas that we should focus on?
Yeah, and this sounds very much like what we see, right? Some customers are really brilliant in some areas, but sometimes they mislook in others. For example, if you're good you can be excellent on security, for example, but leave optimizations on cost, for example, unlooked, and that's quite important. And so what you're saying is that it's not a one just this checklist. We really go and understand.
Yeah, very much so. It's meant to be a discussion. So the way we typically like to pitch this to customers and partners is that it's not an audit. It's not an audit by any stretch. We want to frame it as a discussion. And so we use the Well Architected Framework as kind of that vehicle for that discussion. So we'll go through and we'll ask these questions, but we'd like to start off by having the partner or the customer just describe what their architecture is. Throw some architecture diagrams up. Show us, what do the various services look like? How are they constructed? How does traffic flow through? So that way we can get kind of a feel for what is your architecture, what are the various components. And then from there, when we go through that kind of initial introduction, a lot of times we'll answer some of these questions preemptively. And then we'll go through kind of starting the questions, but we use these questions as kind of a starting point. A lot of times, we don't just take these questions at face value because we want to make sure that, it's not audit like, okay, question 1, question 2, question 3.
Yeah, and we know that an audit happens so differently across enterprises. The amount of things that you share and the things that you do for an audit is completely different. Here I see that we are trying to add value, so it's not about just putting on the makeup and making it look nice for the visitors, but actually building better, right?
Exactly, yeah, and that's the main benefit. So the key takeaway here from a customer or partner who's going through this is they had the time to walk through their architecture with a solutions architect and get valuable feedback. Hey, we never thought about doing this before, or maybe they just kind of wanted that little push to take advantage of things. So for example, I was working with one partner who was kind of just getting started, just building everything. And they were, thinking about using and building their own Kafka cluster. But, after kind of talking about it, evaluating their use case, they decided to go with Kinesis, which ended up saving them a lot of engineering effort, able to get them to go to market faster. And kind of one key point there is we want to make sure that the well-architected framework is not a sales tool. It's not meant to pitch exclusively AWS services. But however, if you are running your own MySQL database, you're spinning it up on EC2, and you don't have a DR story, of course we're going to bring up services like RDS or Partner Solutions, because the whole thing is we want to make sure that you're well architected. You can run your own services and not take advantage of the managed services and still be well architected. It's a completely valid architecture. We just want to make sure you have kind of all those principles in place no matter what services or partner products or rolling your own solutions you're using.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you saying so much about partners. How partners engage in this? What's the role of partners in Well Architected?
Yeah, so there's a couple different vehicles that they come into play here. So one, if you're trying to build your solution on top of AWS, it makes sense to not necessarily build everything yourself, because you want to focus on what makes your product unique. If that's aggregating logs or storing logs, then cool, that's your product. But if you're trying to manage your application, it might be nice to kind of outsource some of those other components to Partner Solutions. Additionally, the other role they play is some partners are actually performing kind of well-architected reviews for partners. They're providing that as a service. And I know you have some additional information, so for the viewers that are watching, if they want to learn kind of more about that, how that works, please reach out to Julio, who can put you in contact with some of those partners.
Yeah, and I guess that this comes back to that point of not having the resources sometimes. Sometimes, everyone's so busy that you just don't have the extra pair of hands to work on this. Right?
Yeah, so like if you don't want to roll your own auth program, you can roll out some partner solutions that kind of take care of that heavy lifting for you, and then focus on the core aspects of your application.
Yeah, but how customers can feel. I know that it may be uncomfortable to share your architectural mistakes and bad decisions with third parties. How do we cope with that?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And a lot of people kind of approach this with a little bit of apprehension because, again, they don't want to air their dirty laundry. But it kind of goes back to the core messaging there. It's not an audit. It's meant to be a discussion, and it's meant to be a benefit as a service that we provide to our customers and partners. And so kind of the more information that a customer and partner divulges, that's the more information that we have to work on and kind of find whether they're doing things correctly or maybe there's some modifications we can make to kind of steer them in the right direction. And so we like for that conversation to be free-flowing on both sides. Now there is an underlying confidentiality aspect there where whatever information that a customer or partner shares with us, like that is confidential. Customer information is very confidential here at AWS. The security of that data is paramount to us, and so we want to make sure that customers feel have an implicit level of trust there with us that we are not going to share that information.
Good, and this is very much so. You can be certain that every customer can be certain that data and everything that they share with us and the partners are under NDA and very well protected. And well, this how does this happen? I mean, when you go into a customer, it's just like meetings, or what kind of how the process rolls? We go by application or by pillar, or how does this interaction usually happens?
Yeah, so it kind of varies based on kind of the existing relationship with the customer or partner and kind of their level of understanding. We typically like to have an introductory phone call just to kind of set that stage and kind of explain what the process is, like what we're doing now. So we'll typically call it like, hey, we like to start off the discussion with just an architecture overview. Ask for them to send us some collateral. But the key component there is identifying who should be on the call or in person or participating in the review from the customer side. Because a lot of these questions, as you go through the white paper and look at these questions, there's some pretty deep details about, from operations to development, to kind of your strategy there from a DR perspective, your RTO and your RPO. And so there's a lot of different people that need to play a role in this conversation. And so we like to kind of identify those, give a sample of some of the questions to make sure they kind of feel comfortable with the areas that we're going to discuss. So whether it's, hey, we run Cassandra on EC2 and this is why. We want to make sure that someone on the call is able to answer that question and kind of design or not necessarily defend, but really explain, like, this is why we did it, this is the decision that we made, and be able to talk about that. Additionally, at the end of the review, we do have, the findings, the areas that need, improvement, or the areas that are fine. We want to make sure that we have a business owner on the call or someone who has sway within the company that can steer the ship and make sure that the items that we've identified can actually be added to a roadmap and remediated. Because we want to make sure that, again, we want our customers and partners to succeed, and the only way for them to succeed is to kind of take these findings and iterate on them.
Yeah, so is it a lot of back and forth? How long does those iterations usually take? It's something that it's a relationship that's ideally like long-lasting, right?
Exactly. So from the review itself, we typically like to block off a couple of hours, and the reason for this is that we do go through the various questions. We do get very deep into the questions, and we want to make sure that we have the amount of time to kind of have that discussion and conduct the discussion, dive through the various areas. And so that takes time. And we want to make sure that we try and do it all in one shot, because if we have to kind of do it in 1 hour chunks, there's a lot of context switching that happens. We want to make sure it's as less intrusive as possible for the customer and partner. And so after that review, what will happen is we'll send over a report. And so the solutions architect that's conducting that review will go ahead and write up, send the output from our internal tooling, as well as some additional information, whether it be a prioritized list of the findings or just some general feedback for the customer and partner. We want to make sure that it's a long-lasting process. And so with the findings that we send back to the customer and partner, we want them to come up with a remediation plan. And so they'll say, hey, you called out using access keys in our build process. So we decided to spin up a Jenkins instance on EC2, and now we're using IAM roles. And so now we've mitigated that finding. And so we want to get that feedback back from the customer or partner, because if they're having issues either adding that or fixing that, or if they just want to get a validation, because we want to make sure that before they spend the engineering time and effort to remediate the findings, that the solution that they're putting in place is actually going to be well architected. Because we don't want them to go off, implement something thinking they're kind of fixing something, then they come back to us and we say, oh gosh, that that might be worse, or hey, you're not almost there yet. Because we want to minimize the impact, because we understand that they want to work on features as well as the items that are currently in play.
So the thing is, when you're saying that they can revalidate and get back to us and
very much so.
Check if what they are going to build is going to be
so
good before just jumping into it.
Exactly.
And what if they don't know how to do it? Like if they don't have the expertise of the knowledge on the service for actually implementing that.
Yeah, and that's where the solutions architect really comes into play. We want to make sure that they have the technical resources at hand, and so the solutions architect that conducts the review should be there and will be there to kind of facilitate that conversation, point them in the right direction. Whether it's coming up with a list of remediation items as well as the recommended solutions. So like, hey, we identified that you're not collecting CloudTrail logs. We typically see customers have a central account that they ship the logs back to, and have some sort of alerting or monitoring based on those logs, and kind of outline some steps of how to improve that. Because we want to make sure that we give them all the tooling that's required to kind of remediate those items, not just a list of items for them to fix and then for them to figure out.
Yeah, this makes sense, especially because things change so much, right? I mean, what is well architected today, maybe not the best architecture, considering that we have new services, price reductions, and everything coming along. So how do customers keep well architected?
Exactly. Yeah, and so one of the big components of the well architected process is just establishing that technical relationship with your solutions architect. So once you go through the framework, and go through these questions, that solutions architect is going to be intimately aware of your application, how it works, the services that are used, how you guys work internally. And so from there, they're able to kind of be that resource going forward. So if you guys have questions, if you guys are having issues, you can reach out to AWS support as well. But that solutions architect that is there to be a resource for you. Additionally, we want to make sure that as things change, so like with reInvent and the summits, and throughout the year, we're constantly releasing new services and features. There could be an area where maybe you guys have been struggling with something, or kind of have written your own solution, and now there's a new way to go through and offload that to AWS. For example, I had a partner who was parsing CloudTrail logs from their customer accounts to kind of do some anomaly detection based on it. I suggested to them to use the CloudWatch event bus to change that from a pull model to a push model. It also reduce the time from 5 minutes to 1 minute. So now it's easier for them to implement. They have less work to do, and it's also faster and more responsive. So things like that come into play as we continue to introduce new services and features. They can take advantage of that. It's something they just might not be aware of.
Cool. Let's go a bit deeper into the pillars and trying to be a bit more specific. So, starting with the security pillar, would you have any specific advice from real customers that are going through the security, and what are the key points that customers usually miss when implementing the security pillar?
Yeah, so a lot of times you'll see in the very first question is, how are you protecting access to your root account? So that's something that we commonly see, I would say less now, but something that's a really big issue to call out is the root account credentials they have no policies associated with them. So if those are compromised in any way, it's a very dangerous situation to be in. So we want to really call that out and hammer that point home. Additionally, it's just how are you accessing the AWS APIs? We want to try and steer customers from using access keys, because there's a lot of heavy lifting that comes with that. You have to store those keys, you have to rotate those keys, you have to manage those keys, versus using something like IAM roles on an EC2 instance, or in the case of like a SaaS platform, or if you're manipulating resources in a customer's account, we strongly encourage you to use cross-account roles in those situations, because there's just a lot of security benefits that come with that. And so really just taking a look at, if you run an application on an EC2 instance, how am I hardening that EC2 instance? Do I have an intrusion detection system enabled? What does my build pipeline look like from a security standpoint? Do I have access keys embedded in that? Just kind of the various touch points with the AWS API, as well as customer data. Customer data is very confidential. You want to make sure that you have a data classification scheme in place. And so being able to kind of explain that, whether I run HIPAA data, or if just financial data, all that stuff comes into play, and having that classification scheme and being able to really define what that looks like at your application level makes a big difference.
Yeah, and we do leverage that ourselves. For example, I hear you talking about data classification, and we just announced Macy, and we have a data classification service. So I'm guessing that we use this feedback ourselves and feedback into the service teams to help improve the things for
exactly. Yeah,
for
so we're commonly listening to kind of areas that customers want to see things from us. And so being able to identify those access patterns. So we listen to our customers, and that again influences our roadmap. Or if we have those challenges internally, we want to make sure that, because we'll go through and solve those challenges, and we'd like to make those available to our customers.
Yeah.
And so in the form of various services that come along, might have been something that we were struggling with internally, and kind of wanted to make that available to our customers.
Yeah, I can see that we have a suggestion from Master Chuck to have Maestro cards to pay. I think this is not going to be on the cost optimization so soon, but we do take the suggestions very seriously. And well, for those, we were just talking about the Well Architected program that we offer to help customers build better apps and more ready to the cloud in these 5 sections, these 5 pillars. We're talking about the security pillar. If we just jumped in now, let's talk a bit about reliability. What are the key aspects that customers face when implementing the reliability pillar?
Yeah, so a good quote to sum it up, Warner, our CTO, said everything fails all the time. And so that's a really good takeaway. So when we go through the review, we'll kind of just point at sections, like, hey, point at the database. What happens if that fails? What do you guys do? What's your plan? We want to make sure that a customer can, talk about that and say, okay, we have an established playbook, or we have an SOP, or we have automation in place that takes care of these things. And so that's really a big component in being able to withstand those failures. And what do you do? So having that documented process, because a lot of times we'll talk with customers or partners, and they're still kind of in that learning stage. They're still trying to figure out, like, what do we do? And kind of the core messaging there is to not figure that out while you're in the heat of the moment. Because when things are flying, you want to make sure that, okay, this is our process. We've tested it. We've always come up on top. We have the necessary artifacts or playbooks, or maybe we have an EC2 instance off to the side for forensics. Having everything in place, ready to go, makes it most of the battle.
But what would you say? Do we have any specific service or feature that would be important or crucial to implementing well-architected reliability?
Yeah, so a lot of the services have kind of this in mind. So if you have an application that's running on EC2, really taking advantage of EC2 auto recovery or auto scaling groups, creating a self-healing architecture. Even if you have a single instance running in a single availability zone, we strongly suggest running multi-UAZ, but you can still use things like an auto scaling group with a min and max of 1 to kind of bring that instance back up. So there's a lot of little tips and tricks there, from a database perspective, leveraging things like RDS, which can do that multi-AZ failover for you with literally just a checkbox.
Yeah, this is a specific one of having one auto scaling group with just one instance. I showed you we did a reliability episode with this trick and many others. If you're implementing that, make sure you check the other episodes too. And for performance, so this is crucial to many customers, and sometimes the primary reason to go to the cloud. And what are your thoughts on the performance efficiency implementations?
Yeah, so a couple of things there. So like one of the benefits of AWS in the cloud is having the agility, the ability to kind of be able to provision new resources, and the elasticity to be able to expand. So leveraging things like auto scaling groups if you're on EC2, or if you decide to go serverless, you can use things like Lambda functions. So all these different services give you kind of the tooling available to instantly expand your architecture to be able to handle kind of that peak traffic, but the ability to kind of scale down, which again kind of goes in the cost optimization pillar to help save you money. And so by being able to take advantage of those resources, if you have an application that sits on an EC2 instance and it's pretty light, maybe look at something like a Lambda function or putting them in ECS, or using Docker yourself or Kubernetes. But just really kind of evaluating all the other options out there to kind of maximize resources while minimizing your cost outlay.
Yeah, and one thing that called to my attention and I did not expect is just centered on a lot on selection as well. So just talking to someone that knows what's the landscape, and because this is not just pick your favorite open source project. You should really measure and see the alternatives and balance things and take a look outside your area of expertise, right?
Yeah, we really call out, just are you on the right size instance? Sometimes T2 micros may be the best choice if you have a small little bursty workload. Making sure that you're kind of tailoring your instance size to your application can really save you a lot of money. If you don't need like an M4 or 8XL, maybe paring that back a little bit, that can save you some money. And so really kind of identifying and having some benchmarks internally. Say, hey, our application typically runs on this instance. We see, kind of this CPU utilization. And then that can also help you kind of identify alarms and trigger points to scale your application by going through that full battery of tests and seeing, hey, if we have, 2,000 users, this is what it looks like. So having that data to back up, kind of your architectural decisions makes a big difference.
Yeah. And what about the next pillar, cost optimization? What are the central thoughts that people must have when implementing cost optimization?
Yeah, so again, it all kind of blends together, the best practices. So like really having, having that scaling in place, but scaling kind of incorporates scaling down as well. So that's a big thing is, if your application doesn't need to be on all the time, scale it back. For the applications that are really only busy during the weekdays, maybe they do something for a school or kind of an email service for a business, maybe paring down during nights and weekends, as well as just being able to, kind of pinpoint where are your costs. So we really like to call out tagging there, having, resource billing per, cost center, things like that. So being able to kind of track that spend, as well as being aware of it from the dashboard. So you can set up things like billing alerts.
Let me show them the billing dashboard, what exactly we are talking about. So this is the billing dashboard for my account, and here you can see that I have some spend. I can see where that comes from, and you're saying that with cost allocation tags, people can see how much it costs per tag, for example, per environment, per customer, per partner, per whatever.
Yeah, and being able to kind of ingest that detailed billing report and do some further analysis based on that. You can also go into the Cost Explorer there. It'll give you kind of a breakdown, kind of over time. Hey, based on this service over time, this is what we saw. During this time window, this is what we saw. And so it really gives you a lot of insight throughout the month of, where are we? How are we doing things? Additionally, if you use something like AWS Organizations, or if you have consolidated billing set up across your accounts, you can now kind of see, hey, this is our dev account, this is our pod account, this is where we're spending our money.
Yeah.
A lot of times, people will kind of leave projects sitting around for a while, especially in the dev account. And so, having a process there to go back and identify those resources, whether it's a tag based on like a ticket number, or some other internal tag that you're using to track those resources, can be really beneficial, especially turning those resources off overnights and weekends.
And we don't think that it doesn't sound that important, but when you make the math and see that, well, if dev and test is like 8 hours a day, it's like 1/3 of the day.
Exactly.
And weekends, and there's a lot of money to save there.
One
thing that I find very helpful, and we showed that on the alerts episode, that you can make billing alerts. And this is one question that I get a lot, and customers all ask, how can I just stop everything if my accounts reach this value, or what if I'm overcharged? So you can have billing alarms. Here I have one at $1,000, and just receive a notification when you learn that your account gets to a certain value, and it's up to you to react to this and review or change and
yeah, it's a common strategy we'll see is companies setting up kind of billing alerts throughout the month, because they know their milestones. Like, maybe 1/3 of the way through the month we typically spend X. Maybe halfway through the month we spend Y. And so being able to kind of have those data points and see, kind of proactively before that bill comes around, hey, maybe it's 7 days in the month and we've already spent twice as much as we normally do. That's kind of your red flag to go and investigate, see what's going on. Maybe someone had a project that maybe wasn't typically tracked or recorded. Just kind of having that visibility. There's a lot of tools there. We have partner solutions that'll go through and ingest those detailed billing reports. Maybe it could just come back to kind of analyzing CloudTrail logs. Maybe that'll give you kind of that audit trail across all the regions.
Sounds good. And it's not only customers' architectures that are improving. The well-architected framework is improving, and we see it evolving a lot. And we added one section to it last year. It was the operational excellence. And what is operational excellence anyway?
Yeah, so that really ties into a lot of the other sections as well. So you build your application, you secure your application, but then there's the other component of, how do I run my application? What are my day-to-day responsibilities? And so again, having that disaster recovery plan, having that kind of incident response. So if we have, maybe we detect someone's in one of our EC2 instances, what do we do? What are our processes? And so having that operational run book or something that kind of your SREs or whoever kind of is running your support organization within your company has that documented process. We typically see companies have kind of a wiki or some sort of knowledge base internally that they can go through and kind of track these common issues, common items. So that way, as people become onboarded, they become kind of up to speed in how our application typically works, how we respond to certain outages or certain kind of alarms and thresholds.
Yeah, and this is interesting because certainly I, as an architect, do think a lot about security, reliability, and performance. From people that's coming from traditional IT, they usually don't have the same maturity in the cost perspective, and cost is something that is massive on the cloud, and it certainly brings a new game for cloud architectures. But this operational excellence is an aspect that is very important and much frequently overlooked. Let's take a look at some questions to help make it a bit more clear and see if we can show some examples on that. It's towards the end, so it's doing costs, operationals. So let's see, Ops 1, for example, what best practices for the cloud? So it's targeted at checklists and plans and making sure that responses are well, and how you're doing your configuration management, if you're using Git and tags, and how everything is documented and keeping up to date. So this is very important, right? For example, because this is where things end up. Say you have a root access or an outage, or anything that you consider an error. So this is pretty much how you handle that.
Yeah,
right?
How do you respond to that? What's your documented process in place? Because it really just comes down to having that standardized process. So that way you don't make those mistakes. Because at the end of the day, you should have an RTO and an RPO defined. And so those, that timeline is going to be defined by, it takes us, 3 hours to go through these 17 steps.
Yeah.
And so, having that process in place allows you to A, cut down that time, but B, it makes sure that you have all the resources available. Because maybe you're going through something and, you need a separate VPC set up to move this instance over, to take a snapshot, or you need some forensics tools in place. Until you've kind of gone through that, really timed everything, raced against the clock, you don't know what resources you need. So having those already set up and in place can kind of, really help you out and cut down that time.
Yeah, we mentioned it a couple of times already, the RTO and RPO that are important for operations. Could you tell for people that are not familiar what it is?
Yeah. So those are two important metrics that are going to really come into play kind of in your disaster recovery scenario. So let's say you have some access keys that you were using and you accidentally checked them into GitHub. And so someone has detected that and is now, doing something against your account. So that would be kind of a disaster recovery scenario, because you need to figure out how you're going to react to that. Are you going to revoke those keys? Are you going to move to a new account? And so that whole process is going to define these two metrics, and that's your recovery time objective and your recovery point objective. So your RTO is how fast, how quickly are you going to be able to remediate everything and get back up and running? So whether this is spinning up a new AWS account, launching all your CloudFormation templates or Terraform or Ansible playbooks to get all your infrastructure back up and running and successfully serving traffic. The RPO is going to be how much data, how recently are you going to be able to kind of restore everything. So if you're jumping ship to another region or another availability zone or another account, how long is it going to take you to take those backups, move those backups, and when you come back online, at what point do you have data? So kind of minimizing that amount of data loss. And so this is where you'll see those DR typical situations where you have the pilot light, or if you have the hot, or the warm standby. Those different scenarios affect these two numbers because whether it's just switching a DNS name, that'll give you kind of that hot standby, whether it's kind of the pilot light where you have maybe just a database there that is kind of asynchronously replicating. So that replication lag is going to be your RPO, depending on how much data it was lost before you were able to kind of fully make that switch.
And I guess it's a balance, right? You have to see under the costs,
very much so, yeah.
Performance, your data replication, what's the best RTO and RPO you can have.
And that's a big decision that really drives the whole process. And it comes down to a lot of people within the company because, like you called out, there's a cost component, there's a technical component, there's, and only the customer or partner can make that decision based on, what is the risk of loss to their customers. If you have performing a real-time analytics service, then those numbers need to be very low for someone versus maybe you run a backup solution that does daily backups or hourly backups. Maybe that would have a kind of a less intense RTO and RPO.
Yeah, and one thing that you mentioned that I find particularly interesting is the different aspects that a failover or a disaster can have. When we talk disaster recovery, people usually think outages, but it's not only that, because everything fails and everything is a lot of things. You can have exposed credentials, perhaps client connectivity issues, and a lot of that can go in this unplanned bucket, right?
Exactly. And so having kind of that catch-all bucket or that catch-all plan, and one of the questions in the Well Architected Framework is having kind of an escalated or a hierarchical kind of support chain. I have my tier 1 support, I have my tier 2 support, and then they make the explicit call out to calling out to third-party vendors or kind of AWS support. Just having that external process in place because you want to make sure that you have kind of those documented contacts, because maybe there is an issue with one of the partner products you're using, or maybe there's an outage in an AWS service, or maybe you need to get in contact with AWS support. So being able to kind of have that bucket where, hey, we don't think there's anything wrong with our application, having that kind of third person check to see, hey, is there something on your side?
Cool. And what's the first step? What do you say that for the people that's watching us and the guy that really says, hey, this is what I need, I want to be well architected, how do they proceed?
Yeah, so the best way to get started is if you just take a look at this white paper. So I'd really recommend you, anyone who wants to get started with this process, or maybe you've already gone through this process, just pull down this white paper. It has a lot of good information in it. It'll go through and outline what are the pillars, what are kind of the best practices that we like to see customers and partners integrate, as well as at the very bottom and scattered throughout the document are the questions. So if you're looking to get started, by going through and kind of doing that self-evaluation against the checklist, it'll go through and help you kind of establish that baseline to make sure that we are doing these things, we have the answers to these questions, and that way maybe if you don't have the time, or you're just kind of not in a good place yet to do it, you can kind of do that self-evaluation first, which will give you, kind of a lot of the same questions, the same recommendations.
Yeah, and you can go through the website, and if you have already account manager working and you have a existing relationship with AWS, you can certainly get in touch with your account manager, solutions architect, and ask about Well Architected. Or even myself, you have my contact information here. It's Julio Faerman, or I will send the details on the channel, and you can always get in to me, and I can surely get you guys in touch with the Well Architected team and partners to help you guys be successful. And after that, how do you say that? What would you suggest for people that are already looking into this and already taking a look at their apps? Like any final advice for people improving their architectures on AWS?
Yeah, I would say a couple different things there, but one is AWS is constantly releasing new services and features, and because of that, the best practices tend to change a little bit over time, just to kind of keep up with that. As new things come out in the technology world, things are constantly evolving, and so being able to continue to adapt your architecture, continuing to take advantage of these best practices as things change over time, is really going to help you, continue to stay on top of things, because there may be situations where maybe an access mechanism like access keys is no longer considered a best practice. So being agile and being able to take advantage of cross-account roles, or if there's a new service that can reduce your costs, like EC2 per second billing, can really change the way your application is architected and how you're dealing with those things. And so, constantly evaluating those things, whether it's attending the AWS summits or continuing to read the blogs, just to take advantage of these new services and be aware of them and how they can fit into your architecture.
Yeah, let me show those resources on AWS, Amazon.com/new. There's the new products page, and we have announcements here. Every couple of days there's a new thing. So, you can see that from CloudFront exploding to new locations or new service features. And one that we just mentioned, let me see if I can find the one on per second. So we have new services supporting per second billing, and you can, for example, for customers running on big data that usually they had to pay by the hour for instances. So this may change their perspective.
Things
and
like
now
Batch.
they can.
Batch now supports the per second billing, so it brings a lot of new use cases to the table. Maybe if you were running something yourself previously, but now you can take advantage of some of these other services that'll A, give you more performance, and B, kind of save you some costs in the long run too.
Yeah, and another resource is the AWS blog, Jeff's blog. You can find more detailed information about the posts and what they mean, and
there's lots of good information
deeper.
In there.
I do recommend everyone follow this.
Yeah, we internally read this blog as well, because there's so many new services and features that are getting launched. A lot of the times this is how we find out as well.
And of course there is us on AWS, Amazon.com/Twitch. So this we are streaming live with you guys and talking today about Well Architected, but we have all sorts of topics, and we are taking just the same way as we take your feedback to the service teams, we take our feedback to the Twitch channel, and we are here to feature everything that you guys find important and help you guys be successful with AWS. And that's all for me. Any closing remarks?
Yeah. The only thing I'd like to say is just I really encourage everyone to pull down that white paper, take a read through it. Even if you don't actually do the review with a solutions architect, there's still a lot of benefit that can be had with it. But definitely recommend taking advantage of it. Reach out to your account team and try and do a review on your application and be open to the feedback that you'll get. I think the feedback we've gotten from customers and partners who have done the review has been kind of overwhelmingly successful. They're all very appreciative of the feedback, as just having the time with the solutions architect to kind of bounce those ideas off. Hey, we were thinking about doing this or doing that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and the whole idea of this stream, the well-architected stream on the live coding, is we are going step by step. So we are going through an overview of all the questions. This week we have another episode around the operational excellence pillar. And we are going to dive deep and create a reference implementation. We have already some code up around security, and we are going to dive deep. And this is kind of a bridge between the developer community and AWS Well Architected team. And I would love to feature anything or any point in specific that you guys may find helpful, because the whole idea is to help you guys be successful with AWS. Thank you very much, Ian. Thank you for taking the time, and I hope to see you on stream more.
Perfect. Thanks everyone for your time today. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.